my background isn't deeply from or extensively from an analyst perspective. In fact, my work within this space is relatively new. For many years, I've been an entrepreneur. I've owned a business. I built a business from the ground up back in 2002, which was a web services business, as Uli said, that ultimately we lost as a result of a cyber attack in 2011. It was a 30-minute breach, resulted in 10-day recovery, and at the end of that 10 days, a fire sale of the assets. So where we started with nothing, we built a business that had about 10% market share, about 300,000 clients. We ended up with nothing at the end of it. So as a result of that, I stepped into talking about that incident, trying to relay some of the learnings from that incident, and then sort of starting to get into studying the market, working with other companies to try and consult and help them with their governance, risk and compliance work around cybersecurity. So as a result of that, I've been looking at the industry for best part of 10 years now, working within the industry, managing security functions, and really getting deeply ingrained in it. So I'm here today to present the security predictions that Ecosystem have put forward for 2020. But I thought what I might do as a starting point is just, again, like Tim did, just put some context around where we're at today, taking some of the data from the Ecosystem cybersecurity research that's online. We're about to finish another decade, and despite the glossy appearance, I'm not 25 anymore. I'm about to head into my sixth decade. I was just working out when I was sitting there, which scares me. But I've seen a few booms and cycles in that period of time, and cybersecurity is no different. We're certainly in the midst of one right now with cyber. But if we look back at where we've come in 10 years, so I lost the distributed IT business in 2011. At that stage, virtualization was a new concept. We're just starting to explore taking physical machines that we had in data centers where we were leasing rack space. Our backup plans might have been a second data center in a different geographic that we could send our data to back up. We might have some tape drives taking some backups as well. But it was physical. Our security controls were focused on physical. Virtualization was just starting to come through. Cloud computing was, I think the analysts were probably talking about it at that stage, but it certainly was just a topic for conversation at presentations like this. Fast forward to 2019, not many of us are thinking first about getting a rack in a data center, going and buying some kit, installing it, networking it. We're just going online and consuming services. We're consuming software as a service, platforms as a service, infrastructure as a service. It's changed dramatically in that period of time. From 2010 to 2019, cybersecurity in 2010, again, the focus of security was an IT issue focused on physical controls at data centers. In 2019, we have governments establishing regulatory frameworks to protect our personal information. Privacy of our personal data is now paramount and front of mind for most governments and most individuals around the world. It's changed within such a short period of time. I'd hate to try and do a prediction right now for what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So what we're actually presenting on is our predictions for 2020, because we can actually foresee those a little bit better than perhaps what we can see in 10 more years' time. But if we look at the state of play from 2019 through to sort of moving forward into 2020, network and infrastructure security is still top of mind. There's still that legacy that I protect my perimeter, I protect my devices, and that's a critical component, the primary component of my security function. Application security, as you can see, is going to catch up. It might not catch up in 2020, but I think within the next couple of years it certainly will catch up, shown by the trends. And data security is racing, and I think that will, along with application security, and we'll get into some of the predictions shortly, which will hopefully reinforce this. The big mover though is SecOps, security operations and incident response. Now, the optimist in me says that people want to be prepared. The pessimist in me says that everyone's just resigning to the fact that it's going to happen and they're going to have to deal with it. But we're seeing a big focus towards security operations and incident response. When we talk about security operations, we're also looking at managed security. So from an opportunity perspective, managed security services is a real buzzword moving into 2020, and that's going to be one of the big areas that we'll see race ahead in the coming years. A lot of the legacy security vendors that are still stuck on the perpetual licensing models, they're going to start to find it harder as organisations want to move from CapEx to OpEx spend within their budgets. Messaging security has obviously been strong for a period of time, continues to expect to grow. That's not going away anytime soon. I guess the ones that surprise me a little bit, given the nature of where we're going with cloud computing, is identity and access management, third from the end. It's gaining ground, but still a long way behind. And I think, again, the challenges of managing such distributed platforms and services and trying to bring all that together and manage your identities within an organisation is a massive beast. And having been through that process personally with a couple of organisations I've worked with, I can understand why. And the other one is GRC, so Governance, Risk and Compliance Solutions. I suspect the reason that that's lagging is Microsoft Excel's still got the market cornered for that. It's probably easier to set up spreadsheets than to actually invest in a solution that manages it for you. So, with that scene set, I'll walk through and I'll try and I'll try and get through this in about 20 or so minutes, try and give a bit of time for questions. As Uli said earlier, I am actually flying back to Melbourne overnight tonight, so I unfortunately can't hang around for the drinks and conversation afterwards. So I will give a little bit of time for some questions if there are any. Otherwise, I'll get you to the ecosystem beer a lot faster. The API vulnerabilities will become a main hacker target. And again, I've seen this one firsthand just recently, which is quite concerning. Third-party risk is not a massively new concept. I think there's a lot more talk around third-party or supply chain risk at the moment. But it's the method and the approach that they're taking which we're starting to see shift. APIs, by their nature, there's this massive demand, particularly with data science, demanding all of this data exchange to and from their environment so that they can consume and get this intelligence. The easiest way for them to do that is through APIs. And they're consuming APIs and services, and it's not just data science, there's a large number of parts of the business that are doing this. They're consuming all of these microservices and they're connecting them up, and they're all connecting them up through insecure APIs. And these APIs, as soon as you start connecting these different services up, you've connected 2 or 3 up, you've pretty much lost any chance of understanding your data flows. It's almost impossible to try and reconcile that, because that third-party supplier engages with another third-party supplier who engages with another third-party supplier, and they're all consuming microservices to bring together their services, which ultimately deliver what you want. So the ability to track where your data's going is almost impossible. So data breaches, by attacking the APIs, the connectivity between these microservices, is going to be one of the big areas that we foresee sort of coming into the new year. The other thing that they again, first-hand experience they can do is use those APIs to poison the data supplies, so poison the data you're getting in if they're insecure. Also use them as a method for denial of service. So indirectly attacking your services by attacking APIs and bringing those down so that you can't actually connect to or consume the information or the services that you're subscribing to. So we see, again, with the stats showing this massive uplift in consumption of software as a service and infrastructure as a service, APIs being a major attack vector coming into 2020. A couple of really interesting ones that have already come out. So late 2018, Google Plus had an API bug which exposed, I think, about 500,000 records. And then Facebook, a couple of months later, had one that was 1,500, I think, apps had access to about 6.8 million users' private images. So we're already seeing some vulnerabilities being exposed in APIs, and our expectation is moving into 2020, we're going to see a lot more focus on that. Operational technology. So when I talk operational technology and IoT, I don't necessarily talk about your smart fridges or your smart TVs. Talking a lot around industrial systems, even to the point of sensors like Tim was talking about outside in the street. The challenge with operational technologies is that a lot of it is 20 years old, and it's been embedded into infrastructure that is 20 years old or 30 years old, and it's very, very hard to change. The other problem we've got with operational technologies is there's no real regulatory frameworks to control that at the moment. The focus across the world is on privacy of personal information. So the data that OT normally holds is not really PI data. It's ones and zeros. It's little bits of information, little statistical information, which is valuable for the consumer who needs that information to make business decisions or to make health and safety decisions. Not necessarily going to create a data breach. So without that regulatory framework around it, the desire or the need for some of those vendors to really heavily invest in security of those systems is just not there. So the driver of security in OT will come from incidents. And I don't think necessarily we're going to see major incidents in the next 12 months. There's always a chance, but I think that's a longer term, a longer horizon situation. What it does do though, and I think the issue with OT security is that health and safety issue. Where if we go back 10 years ago, looking retrospectively again at 2010 versus 2019, major conflict was probably considered to be, would be started by an invasion of, by an army, by military. In 2019, the expectation is a major conflict will be started by a cyber incident. And more than likely, a cyber incident on OT, infrastructure, systems that create interruption to everyday lives, to our ability to operate. So I think on that backdrop, our prediction here is that we don't see any changes in regulation in the environment that will predicate an urgent sort of uplift in security around OT. In fact, with GDPR and privacy regulations globally sort of being the focus and continually being evolved, that focus on PI and protection of privacy will always get the dollar first from a security perspective over something like OT. So and building upon that, our focus, if we look at our drivers of continued focus of cybersecurity, our focus is still on compliance. 2 of the top 5 responses were industry and country compliance requirements responding to an incident breach. The only part that OT may fall into there is project requirement, digital transformation perhaps, or if an organisation is very mature, their risk management program. But typically that risk management program would be a consumer or a user of that OT, then saying, hang on, we've got to put some security around this technology, going back to the vendor and saying, what are you doing about it? The vendor saying, there's not much we can do at the moment, this is what it is. The other challenge with OT is a lot of these devices are very small and there's a physical restriction to actually doing anything that might warrant or might constitute a security hardening of a device. Most of them don't have the memory or the storage capacity to install security programs or technologies in there to provide any protections that you might want on the device. So we're down to protecting at a perimeter level, we're down to protecting at a server level, but we're not down to protecting at the device level. So at this point in time, we don't see a major shift in OT security compliance or security controls. And as a result, the expectation is that that's just going to continue to build a security debt, that at some point in time, the big consumers, the big users of operational technologies, and the big manufacturers of those devices are going to have to play a lot of catch up very, very quickly, which will cost them significantly more. The next one is AI training will receive the attention from regulators. So over the last couple of years, the big players, your Googles, Apples, Amazons have been building their platforms. And I think this probably complements, feeds into what Tim was saying earlier as well. they've been building their platforms. They're now moving into training their platforms. And until now, training their platform has meant capturing the information from the devices and using that to build and learn and tune their algorithms. It was brought out not that long ago, actually, that I think it might have been Alexa it was, where Alexa was actually recording everything that was said after it heard its name. And all of that information was getting fed back into their central servers for the learning. At that point in time, there was a bit of an uproar about it. They came out and they made the announcement that they were going to change their policy around how they tune and train their platform, and they're going for a more federated model. Hasn't quite happened yet, and if that comes through, that will be a good result. But essentially, a federated model would be the data stays on the device, does the training there, and just we'll call it the metadata, would get fed back without that sensitive information being fed back to the central servers. Again, they've made the announcement that they're going to change their policy. The others haven't quite got to that point yet. But we might see, with the work that's being done under GDPR, I think Amazon's being looked at in Luxembourg for privacy issues under GDPR for this particular point. We might just see that change in the new year, and for the better. Hopefully they all move to that federated model, but we will see potentially some breaches and certainly some claims against privacy breaches under this particular model. Every one of the top AI solutions, these are the top AI solutions analysing personal data. I must admit, I'm not a fan of AI. They talk about insecurity a lot, and we question it a lot because with AI insecurity, the issue with AI insecurity is that it doesn't take much to deviate slightly off course for the technology to then start to yield very, very wrong results. And from a security perspective, you start to yield very wrong results on a very short term, and you have a significant issue. But again, AI is very much focused, particularly with those big players, around personal data, personalisation, and building that personal solution that understands your every next move. I'll jump straight into the last one, the second last one, because this feeds in. GDPR fines. We've seen GDPR come into effect since May 2018. We've been going now for its first full year in 2019. In 2018, there were 2 fines issued. In the first half of 2019, there were, I think, 17 fines issued for a total of about 54 million euros, and the bulk of that was Google for one particular issue. In the third quarter of this year alone, we had 12 fines issued and somewhere around 328 million euros. Now, caveat, there are some of those fines that are still under review or under hearing, but what we're seeing is an exponential growth. One of the challenges we've had with GDPR uptake is that once GDPR was released, all of the countries in the EU then had to work out their own policies and frameworks for actual implementation and management of this. We're starting to see them get that established. We're starting to see them get some fines and get some processes under their belts now. So what our expectation is in 2020 is that we're going to see a significant or exponential increase in this. The offset of that is, as a result, the multinationals that may have previously not considered themselves too at risk in this particular scenario may start to invest a lot more in security and compliance data management once they start to see a few more €100 million fines coming out in the new year. But we certainly see a significant uplift. More closer to home, in Australia, there's a Privacy Act in Australia. I think most nations are starting to put these in place. The Privacy Act in Australia is actually, I don't think they've actually issued a fine. Having said that, the maximum fine is, I think, a monetary amount of about $1.7 million. They're looking to change that at the moment to try and become a bit more aligned with this sort of model where it's a percentage of revenue. But as it stands today, GDPR is the biggest focus for multinationals, just given the scale of the ability of the fines that they can actually issue, the scale of the reach. So our expectation for 2020 is that we will see significant investment from the multinationals into security and compliance as a result of, or on the back of, GDPR fines really ramping up. And the last one I'll talk to is M&As, and I think for this particular room as well, in particular in with SGInnovate and what a lot of people in the room here are looking to achieve. You're looking for the opportunities, and you're looking for where the markets are at. Where are the gaps? What can I get into? And cybersecurity presents a couple of really interesting opportunities at the moment. As I said, I've been through a few cycles through IT, web services, digital media, and they all have a very similar process or flow about them. It's very, we'll call it the Wild West at the start. There's a lot of small players, a lot of very deep technology-centric players in the space. It gets market attention, it gets hold, everyone comes in, it starts to mature, it becomes fragmented because there's so many players in the market, everybody wants to get their own startup. The consolidations start to happen, and then the market starts to mature and stabilise. Saw that in the 90s with computer hardware, where we had, first of all, the rise of the home computer, and then we had Y2K not long after that, all the way through to 2000. Then we had in the 2000s, we had digital media, and we saw all of these web services companies and messaging companies start to consolidate. There was a big raft of consolidation sort of in the late 2000s through to sort of early sort of this decade, and then it starts to mature and stabilise. Security is going through a similar thing at the moment. We're probably 2 or 3 years into it really taking hold, where it's really front of mind, and there's a lot of attention in the media, at government level. Everyone's starting to see the opportunity. So we're at that point now where we're starting to see a significant uplift in participants and opportunity in the space, significant increase in budgets and spend. We're starting to see venture capital and private equity money come into the space. And I'll put this slide up there for you to look through. I won't talk through each of the deals in particular. The most recent one is an Australian one, which is CyberCX, which is a private equity-backed roll-up of 12 consultancies to create the biggest consultancy business in Australia. So we're starting to see that money coming into the market to really take advantage of the opportunity within cybersecurity. The issue with it is it becomes more around a transaction for everybody rather than actually solving a problem. So we're starting to potentially see the ability for the industry in some senses to lose its way a little bit, where we get the fear of missing out, and we're worried about where to, how do I get myself a transaction, either as a buyer or as a seller of a security business. But I think there's no doubts with the work that's being done at government level, with the work that's being done in tertiary education, there's going to be another raft of that security entrepreneur coming through soon. You've got some very large established players that are cashed up, that have been making good money for a long time, that are wanting to stay relevant. So they'll be looking for opportunities to acquire new tech. You've got the private equity, you've got the venture capitalists, and then you've just got the ones that have been in the game for 10 or 15 years that have had enough and they want to retire. All in all, I think 2020 we're going to see a marked increase in the number of transactions and the valuation multiples that we're going to see coming out of it. So from an innovation perspective, I think I would put cybersecurity up there as one of the top sort of 1 or 2 industries with an opportunity in the next few years to capitalise on. So as I said, I promised I was going to wrap it up as quickly as possible so we can get to some questions and get you over to some beers. To round off, so our predictions were a little bit, I wouldn't say disjointed. There's such a broad area in security. There's so many things happening. We had to try and pick the 5 big ones, the most relevant and the most pressing and the most, I would say, the most obvious in the next sort of 12 months. And I think API vulnerabilities, that whole supply chain risk, without a doubt. If you're developing technology You might not be a security firm, but if you're developing technology and you're looking to integrate with other organisations, provide those data feeds, you're a development firm or a developer, think of your software development lifecycle. Make sure that you invest in security as an organisation and you prepare yourself for the inevitable questions you're going to get from your clients around how you protect the data. And also consider the ownership of those APIs, who's responsible for protecting them, who's responsible for monitoring them, and who's responsible for responding to an incident if there is a breach at an API level. OT security, as I said, don't expect much of a change there actually. I think what we'll see is the same issues continue to reverberate but bounce around because of a lack of inaction from a compliance perspective. And as we saw with the stats, compliance is a big feature. If there's a compliance requirement, organisations will typically put that to the top of the queue and invest. If there's not, they'll respond if they have an incident or they have a pressing need that's been called out for any specific reason. But OT, I think, is still going to slip under the cracks, and I think there's some physical constraints that are going to hold that back for some time to come. AI training, hopefully these federated models will come to play in 2020. I think the US is stagnating a little bit on bringing out some policies around that, but EU, the expectation is that the EU will come ahead, particularly under the auspices of GDPR, and start to regulate the use of that information. GDPR fines will force MNCs, so the spend in security will significantly grow, if it hasn't already grown, but the spend in security will significantly grow, particularly at the bigger end of town with multinationals, as a result of GDPR starting to find its feet and the fines really growing. So the budgets within security or for security are going to continue to grow significantly in 2020. I don't think we've seen any sort of sign of any ceiling on that front at this stage. And as a result, wrapping all of those things together is probably an environment that is ripe for M&A activity. It's ripe for higher valuations, it's ripe for innovative ideas and the ability to get audiences with buyers, and therefore obviously take advantage of one of the top 2 or 3 global risks that we're facing today.